Redditor 1. I was 16, plagued by relentless insomnia. In our old house, a creaky two-story home with a basement, seemed to amplify every sound in the dead of night. We lived on just over 2 acres of land in a small Midwestern town, far enough from neighbors that the darkness felt vast and oppressive, yet close enough that the occasional streetlight flickered in the distance. One bitterly cold winter night, I was home alone with my younger brother. Our parents and our little brother had been taken to the hospital. My father had just undergone surgery, and the house felt eerily empty. The silence of that night was broken only by the occasional howl of the wind outside and the steady tick of the ancient clock in the hallway. My brother had fallen asleep quickly, his soft breathing a steady reminder of normalcy, while I lay awake, my mind racing with exhaustion and a restless need for sleep. It was around 3 or 4 in the morning when I first heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Heavy footsteps echoed from downstairs, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of someone pacing back and forth. At first, I assumed it was a burglar, someone who had broken in to pilfer our few possessions. Terror coiled in my gut as I lay there frozen, convinced that if I remained quiet, the intruder would simply take a few things and leave without waking anyone. I couldn't bring myself to move a muscle. My limbs locked in a state of silent panic as I listened to the sound reverberate through the stillness of the night. When dawn finally broke, I crept downstairs to find everything as it had been. No valuables were missing, and there was no sign of an intruder. The only evidence of that mysterious visit was a lingering echo in my mind, and a deep, unsettling sense that something inexplicable had occurred. In the days that followed, I tried to put the incident out of my mind, chalking it up to my overactive imagination fueled by sleep deprivation. But then, a month or 2 later, the footsteps returned, again and again, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. This time, the sounds were unmistakably coming from the floor directly below my room. No matter how many nights I tried to ignore them, they persisted, a repetitive, unyielding presence in the dead hours. My family, already skeptical due to my chronic insomnia and obvious sleep deprivation, dismissed my accounts as nothing more than hallucinations. I felt increasingly isolated, burdened by an experience that no one else seemed to share. One night, when I was up later than usual with my mother, she too was awake, perhaps restless or simply curious. I mentioned the strange sounds. Together, we listened in silence as the noise, which I had come to dread, emanated from the same floor we were on. My mother's calm voice broke the silence. "No way, that's just Dad. I'll go take a look." A few minutes later, she returned, her eyes wide with surprise as she informed me that Dad was fast asleep in his room. For a moment, a fleeting validation warmed me amidst the cold dread. I wasn't entirely alone in experiencing something unexplainable. Yet even that explanation felt insufficient, a poor substitute for the strange phenomenon that had gripped my nights. Over time, more and more family members began to notice the sounds. We eventually coined the term the poltergeist to refer to this persistent, unsettling presence. It was never overtly malicious, never accompanied by violence or overt terror, but it left a tangible mark on our home. One day, to our collective shock, we found one of our hammers bent backward, its metal twisted in a way that defied any rational explanation. That was the moment I realized that these nightly disturbances were not simply the product of an overactive mind. Determined to gather evidence, we set up a night vision camera in the living room, hoping to capture the elusive sounds and any visual clues that might accompany them. For a few nights, we recorded diligently, and we did manage to capture the low, resonant footsteps along with a sound that unmistakably resembled a heavy sigh, like the soft clink of glass being set on a countertop. I remember listening to the tape in a darkened room, my heart pounding, as the static-laced audio confirmed what my eyes had already seen in my mind's eye. Unfortunately, in a moment of careless panic during the Super Bowl, we accidentally taped over the recording. The loss of that evidence left a bitter taste of regret, as if the truth had slipped further from our grasp. My mother, ever the brave soul, once experienced the phenomenon herself. One night, she descended into the basement, her voice steady yet imbued with an uncharacteristic determination, and addressed the presence directly. "It's dead," she declared softly, her words echoing against the cold concrete walls. "And go towards the light." I don't recall exactly what followed, but from that night onward, the sounds gradually subsided, as if my mother's defiant command had finally broken the hold of the poltergeist. Now, years later, as I reflect on those nights of terror and uncertainty, I still grapple with the question of what truly happened. Was it a genuine paranormal presence, a residual energy trapped within the walls of our aging house? Or was it merely the product of sleep deprivation, an overactive imagination stretched thin by the relentless strain of insomnia? I do know one thing. Every time I lie awake in a quiet room, a part of me wonders if that same inexplicable sound might once again echo through the halls, reminding me that the world is far more mysterious than we dare to admit. I still remember the feeling of cold dread when the footsteps first began, the way my heart pounded so fiercely that I could feel it in my bones. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. Alone in a dark house with nothing to hold onto but my own racing thoughts. And yet, in that isolation, there was also a strange kind of beauty, a glimpse into the unknown, a silent reminder that not everything can be explained away by logic or reason. Even if the rational part of my mind dismisses it as sleep paralysis or hallucination, the memory remains a vivid tapestry of sound, fear, and a persistent longing for answers. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 2. I remember visiting my grandparents' old house with my family. That house, with its creaking wooden floors and cold, cavernous basement, always had an unsettling air about it. I didn't understand it back then, but I was convinced that every night, as the darkness deepened, an outline of a person would appear in the basement doorway. I was absolutely certain that someone or something was standing there. I can still recall the chill that would seep into my bones on those nights. The basement was freezing, its concrete walls and unheated air a stark contrast to the warmth of the guest beds upstairs. Everyone in our visiting party would be tucked away in sleep, wrapped in blankets on their makeshift beds. But I, too frightened to close my eyes, would lie awake in my nightgown, my little body trembling with terror. In that pitch-black room, every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside the window, magnified into 1,000 fearful whispers. And then, as if scripted by my overactive imagination, I would see it. A tall, shadowy figure standing silently in the basement doorway. I couldn't see its features in the murk. It was just an indistinct silhouette, stretching far too high for any person I knew. I remember how my heart would pound so fiercely I could hear it echoing in my ears, and my small body would break out in a cold sweat. I'd lie there frozen, feeling completely helpless, unable to call out to my sisters who slept soundly beside me. I never dared to move, convinced that even the smallest shift might make the figure vanish, or worse, draw its attention to me. At the time, I was so sure of what I saw that I'd spend hours later in the hazy light of early morning trying to piece together every detail. I would creep out of bed, sometimes silently wandering down to the basement doorway to see if it was still there. Every time, the figure would be gone, leaving behind nothing but the lingering chill in the air and a heavy, inexplicable sense of dread. I couldn't explain why I felt so paralyzed with fear, as though some unseen force was keeping me rooted to the spot. Eventually, my grandparents moved out of that creaky old house. I never quite understood why. They said it was getting too old, too hard to maintain. But even after we left, I swear I sometimes caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure peering around the doorway of my bedroom. It was always the same, impossibly tall, featureless, and undeniably out of place. No one in our family had ever been that tall, and I knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't any of them. The memory of that spectral figure lingered like a stubborn ghost in the corners of my mind, a secret that only I seemed to carry. Years later, when I was old enough to understand more about the world, I hesitantly mentioned these experiences to my grandfather. We were sitting on his worn old porch one summer evening, and I told him about the figure in the basement and the occasional shadow that would appear by my bedroom door. He chuckled, his weathered face creasing into a smile that was both fond and teasing, probably a dead soldier looking for his whiskey. He said in that dry, matter-of-fact way only grandparents can. His words, meant as a joke, both lightened the mood and deepened the mystery for me. Even if it was his way of dismissing what I'd seen, I couldn't help but feel that there was something more to it. In the quiet solitude of my childhood nights, I often wondered if the figure was a remnant of something lost, a memory of a life or a soul that had lingered too long, doomed to wander the threshold of that old house. The idea wasn't frightening in the conventional sense, not like monsters in a horror film, but it was profoundly unsettling all the same. I would lie there, wide awake, straining to see even the faintest detail of that shadow, convinced that if I could only focus, I might understand its purpose. Sometimes the sensation was almost comforting, a strange, inexplicable familiarity in the presence of the unknown. I remember thinking in those moments of terror that perhaps the figure was trying to communicate, to let me know that I wasn't alone in the darkness. But any thought of connection was quickly overwhelmed by the raw, paralyzing fear of being seen by something so otherworldly. Even as the years passed and I grew older, those early experiences never fully left me. The image of that tall, indistinct figure in the basement doorway became a constant echo in my dreams. Whenever I returned to an old house or even passed by a basement window, I would get a sudden, inexplicable chill, as if I were being reminded of that long-ago night. It was as though that memory had etched itself into my very soul, an indelible mark left by a fleeting brush with the inexplicable. I've tried to make sense of it all through the lens of rationality. Perhaps it was simply the product of an overactive imagination, a vivid dreamscape born of childhood fears and the eerie isolation of that old house. But the consistency of the experience, the fact that I remembered every detail so clearly despite being so young, has always made me wonder if there was something more real to it than mere fantasy. Now, as I sit in the comfort of my own home, far removed from the dark, cold basements of my childhood, I can't help but feel a lingering presence of that past. Sometimes, when I walk past a window on a quiet night, I swear I catch a glimpse of a shadow that doesn't belong. I've learned to live with it, to treat it as a part of my own history, a secret connection to something that might have been an echo of another time, another life. My grandparents never spoke much of it after they left the house, and my family grew up with the unspoken understanding that some memories are best left unexamined. Yet, those quiet, haunting nights remain with me, a mixture of fear, wonder, and a touch of melancholy for a mystery that has never been solved. Whether it was a ghost, a figment of a child's imagination, or something truly beyond the realm of our understanding, it has shaped the way I perceive the shadows and silences of the night. I sometimes wonder if that figure, that ghostly outline in the basement, was simply a reminder that even in the darkness, there is always something watching, a silent witness to the passage of time, a remnant of forgotten souls. And perhaps in some way it was a part of me, a memory of a moment when the world was vast, mysterious, and filled with secrets too profound for a young mind to comprehend. Even now, I carry that secret with me, a hidden chapter in the story of my life that whispers of things unseen and unfathomable. And no matter how much I grow or how many years pass, the memory still lingers, a quiet, persistent echo in the darkness. Redditor 3. It was a crisp autumn evening in Washington, and I was deep in the woods with my gear, determined to bag a trophy that night. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, and a distant, low hum of wildlife settling in for the night. I was carrying my trusty 7M Magnum, a beast of a firearm capable of taking down any creature that dared cross my path. That night, however, nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered. I'd been tracking game for hours, moving silently through the underbrush, my senses alert to every movement. The trees loomed high, their branches tangled like the veins of the forest, and the dim light from the fading sun cast long, eerie shadows on the ground. As I reached a small clearing near an old logging trail, something caught my eye. An outline in the distance that at first I assumed was just another wanderer in the woods. It was draped in what looked like a blue coat, its figure barely distinguishable against the twilight. I slowed my pace, gripping my rifle a little tighter as I stepped closer. Something about that shape just didn't feel right. My instincts, honed by years of hunting, screamed that this was no ordinary person. Despite my confidence and the power of my magnum, a cold shiver crawled up my spine. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I could sense an unsettling aura emanating from that figure. I moved forward slowly, my eyes never leaving the shape. The figure seemed to be standing perfectly still in the clearing, and as I approached, it began to move in a way that defied the normal expectations of a human being. It darted in and out from behind a cluster of trees, its form flickering like a bad signal on an old television. At one point, it moved upward, roughly 7 feet up, peeking from behind the dense brush. In that instant, it appeared solid, its silhouette clearly defined against the darkening sky. And then, as if under some mysterious command, it shimmered, its edges dissolving into a cascade of fleeting light. I felt my heart hammering in my chest as the sight overwhelmed me. My mind raced. Was this some sort of trick of the light, a hallucination born from fatigue? I couldn't decide, but every instinct urged me to retreat. I took a step back, and then another, until I realized I'd been so focused on the strange figure that I hadn't been watching my step. My boot caught on something. A rusted, abandoned hobo camp rifle lying forgotten on the forest floor, and I tripped, sprawling hard against the damp earth. Time seemed to slow as I scrambled to my feet, the echo of my fall mingling with a rising sense of panic. The object in the blue coat was still there, now emerging more boldly from the shadows, as if it wanted to be seen. I backed away slowly, each step measured and deliberate, my eyes never leaving its flickering form. My mind was in a whirl of terror and disbelief. I couldn't fathom that something so inexplicable was right there in the woods, in a place where I expected only the familiar rustling of leaves and the quiet calls of nocturnal animals. I made my way toward the direction of my buddy's truck, which was parked about 200 feet away on a barely visible trail. With every step, I kept my gaze fixed on that enigmatic figure, my legs moving in a desperate backwards shuffle. The dense canopy above offered little shelter from the ominous glow that now seemed to pulse intermittently in the darkness. Every nerve in my body was on high alert, and the only sound I could hear was my own rapid breathing and the soft thud of my boots on the forest floor. As I neared the truck, my heart nearly leapt from my chest. My buddy appeared out of the gloom, and the moment our eyes met, he looked as pale as a ghost. His expression was one of raw, unfiltered terror, an emotion that needed no words. He didn't ask me what I'd seen. His silence said it all. The shock in his eyes mirrored mine, and together we exchanged a look that conveyed a shared, unspoken understanding. We had both witnessed something that defied explanation, something that clawed at the edges of our rational minds. Without a word, we quickly climbed into the truck, our movements stiff and robotic as we drove away from that haunted clearing. The truck's engine roared to life, and for a brief moment, the familiar hum of the vehicle provided a semblance of comfort amid the chaos of my thoughts. But even as we sped away, I couldn't shake the image of that bizarre figure, its form shifting and shimmering against the night. Later, when the adrenaline began to fade, my mind turned over the event again and again. I researched late into the night, scrolling through online forums and reading accounts of similar encounters in the region. Many spoke of fleeting glimpses of lights and forms that defied the boundaries of normal life. I even compared the descriptions to military experiments and folklore, yet nothing seemed to match the precision of what I had seen. The fact that I'd been armed with a magnum, a weapon that should have made me feel invincible, and yet I had felt utterly powerless, only deepened the mystery. Even now, years later, I often find myself glancing up at the treetops when I'm out hunting or when I'm simply driving through the wooded backroads of Washington. The memory of that night, the terror, the inexplicable movement of that shadow, and the desperate, backwards trek to safety still lingers in my mind like a ghost that refuses to be laid to rest. I sometimes wonder if that encounter was a trick of the light, or if it was something far more real, an anomaly that exists on the fringes of our understanding. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the forest is hushed and the world is still, I can almost feel that presence again, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a subtle shift in the shadows that sends a shiver down my spine. My buddy never spoke of it again, and I didn't press him for details. Some things, I realized, are better left as unresolved mysteries, haunting fragments of a night when the ordinary world cracked open to reveal something astonishing and inexplicable. I've come to accept that I may never have all the answers. Perhaps it was just a hallucination born of extreme stress, or a rare phenomenon that even nature could not account for. But every time I pass through those dense whispering woods or catch a glimpse of a figure moving at the edge of my vision, I'm reminded of that fateful night. The night when a strange, shifting entity in a blue coat forced me to question everything I thought I knew about the world. And so I live with that memory, a mix of dread and wonder, a lingering echo in the back of my mind that sometimes, in the silence of the forest, the universe reveals its secrets in the most terrifying of ways. Editor for When we got married, my wife's sister gave us a gift certificate for a night at a charming bed and breakfast not far from where we live now. We were both excited by the promise of a quiet getaway, a break from our hectic urban lives. What I didn't know, nor did I ever ask if my wife knew, was that the place was built on a farm dating back to the 1700s, with dark stories whispered about its past. Legend had it that the farmer's daughter, who had died at a young age, still haunted her old room. They even told us her ghost's name, though I can't quite recall it now. That was 25 years ago, yet the memory remains as vivid as if it happened yesterday. The night we arrived, the air was cool and the sky a clear tapestry of stars. We checked in and were shown to our room, a modest chamber with antique furniture and a roaring stone fireplace that lent the space a comforting, old-world charm. My wife immediately settled in, her gentle laughter mingling with the soft crackle of the fire, while I admired the rustic details, the creak of the wooden floor, the faint scent of old wood and lavender from the nearby gardens, and the quiet solitude that made everything feel timeless. After dinner, we retired early, my wife drifting off almost as soon as our heads hit the pillow, her light breathing the only sound in the otherwise silent room. I, however, found myself restless, perhaps not wanting the night to end so soon. I lay there, listening to the whisper of the wind through the window and the low hum of the ancient building, settling into sleep. Eventually, my eyes fluttered closed, and I drifted into a fitful slumber. Sometime in the middle of the night, around 3 a.m. I believe, I woke up with a start. My room was dark, illuminated only by the flickering embers of the dying fire in the hearth. I was disoriented for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, when I noticed an unusual brightness near the fireplace. At first, I thought the fire had flared unexpectedly, but as I squinted in the dim light, I saw something that made my heart freeze. Floating there, near the base of the fireplace, was a luminous white apparition. It wasn't a solid figure, but rather something that looked like a circular woven wicker sheet folded neatly in half, interlaced with delicate white flowers. The image was superimposed on the dark room, as if it had been painted by light itself rather than cast by any physical object. I felt a mixture of awe and an unsettling calm, as if I were witnessing a scene from one of those old ghost stories, yet it was happening right before my eyes. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, too terrified to move. I knew my wife was a light sleeper. If I tried to get up or call out, I was sure she would wake immediately. I whispered softly, "Hello," though even that felt like a trembling joke in the face of the inexplicable. The apparition seemed to pause, as if acknowledging my greeting. Its presence was gentle yet undeniable, a silent visitor from a past steeped in sorrow and mystery. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the ghostly image shifted. I watched in disbelief as it hung there for a few more seconds before it suddenly zipped out of the room. I couldn't see where it went immediately, but a moment later, I caught a glimpse of it darting towards the bathroom. The transition was so abrupt that it felt like the fabric of the night had torn open and swallowed the ghost whole. My pulse raced, my mind a whirlwind of questions that I was too frightened to answer. I lay back down, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that it had been nothing more than a dream, a product of my overactive imagination in an old, creaky room. Yet the image of that shimmering floral apparition remained etched in my memory, as vivid and tangible as the cold sheets beneath me. I didn't dare move, listening instead to the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the building as it settled into its ancient slumber. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my terror, and I drifted back into a troubled sleep. In the morning, I awoke to the normal sounds of the day: birds chirping outside the window, the gentle rustling of leaves, and the faint scent of dew on the grass. My wife was already up, preparing breakfast in the small, sunlit kitchen. I recounted the strange encounter in halting, almost whispered tones, expecting skepticism or laughter. Instead, she listened intently, her eyes reflecting a curious mix of concern and intrigue. "Maybe it was just the ghost of the farmer's daughter," she murmured, half joking, half in wonder. Her words sent a chill down my spine, confirming what I had already suspected about the history of that very room. Later, as we sipped our morning coffee on the back porch, I couldn't help but glance back at the building, half expecting to see a flicker of that eerie light or catch a glimpse of a figure roaming the halls. But nothing appeared, only the calm of a new day and the mundane bustle of modern life. I tried to brush it off, to rationalize the experience as a trick of my tired mind or the influence of an old, haunted place, but the memory persisted, a quiet, persistent echo of a night when the past reached out and touched me. I spent the rest of the day pondering what it all might mean. Was it truly the spirit of the farmer's daughter, drawn by the familiar energy of a room once her own, or was it something else entirely? Perhaps an echo of love and loss, a fragment of history that refused to fade into oblivion? I scoured old records and read the faded legends of that farm, but the details were as elusive as the ghost itself. All I knew was that it had greeted me, however briefly, and then vanished, leaving behind a silence that was as profound as it was unsettling. That night, when we returned to our urban apartment, I found myself still glancing at windows and doorways, half expecting to catch another glimpse of that spectral figure. I never did see it again, but the memory remains, a reminder that our past, no matter how distant, can sometimes reach out and intersect with our present in ways we can hardly comprehend. And though I have grown to live a life of rationality and measured routine, I still sometimes lie awake, wondering if somewhere in the quiet corners of the night, the ghost of the farmer's daughter might be watching, waiting for someone to remember her story once more. Redditor 5. My girlfriend and I were on a spontaneous road trip, our destination undefined as we followed the winding highway up the rugged coast. We decided on a whim to park near a secluded stretch of beach about an hour's drive south of Monterey. The moon hung low and full, bathing the shore in silver light as we set up our modest camp under the stars. The night air was cool and salty, carrying with it the distant crash of waves against jagged rocks. We sat together on a worn blanket spread out on the damp sand, talking quietly and letting the steady rhythm of the tide lull us into a sense of calm. I remember how the sound of the ocean blended with our soft laughter, creating a harmony that made the vast dark expanse of the sky feel both infinite and inviting. Then, quite suddenly, something caught my eye. I was tracing a line of thought about old legends and forgotten cryptids when I noticed a huge, shadowy figure slowly emerging from the darkness above the horizon. At first, I assumed it was just another bird, a hawk or an eagle perhaps, but as it drew nearer, I realized with a start that it was no ordinary bird. I had seen hawks, golden eagles, owls, vultures, even condors in my time, yet nothing I'd witnessed before looked like this. The creature moved with an unhurried grace, its massive leathery wings beating slowly against the night air. Its form was enormous, at least as big as the full moon itself, and as it drew nearer, its details began to resolve. I squinted, and in that moment of clarity my first thought was that I was looking at a dragon. But no fire belched from its jaws, no scales glinted with metallic sheen. Instead, it appeared to be a living relic, a pterosaur from a time long past. My heart pounded fiercely as the creature drew nearer. Its immense reptilian wings cast long shadows over the beach, and the soft sound of its wing beats mingled with the ocean's roar in an eerie, almost hypnotic cadence. I could see it now, in stark profile against the luminous orb of the moon, a silhouette both majestic and terrifying in its raw, ancient power. My girlfriend's eyes widened in awe as she stared upward, and for a few excruciating seconds, we sat there in silent wonder, our voices lost in the overwhelming enormity of the moment. Then something changed. The creature seemed to shift its path ever so slightly, its massive form beginning to slow down as if deliberately choosing its next move. I felt a chill, as though my very focus had been magnetized by this impossible sight. My mind, usually so quick to rationalize, stilled entirely as the creature pulled straight up into the air. I watched, transfixed, as its form began to blur at the edges. In a slow, disconcerting progression, the creature seemed to turn almost translucent, its details fading away like smoke in the wind, until, in the blink of an eye, it vanished into the vastness of the night sky. For a long moment, I sat there on the cool sand, the memory of that brilliant, flying reptilian cryptid burning in my mind. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with questions and an unspoken promise that the universe harbored secrets far beyond our understanding. I tried to reach for my phone to capture any lingering evidence, but the moment had passed, leaving me with nothing but the indelible imprint of its presence. We spent the next hour walking along the shoreline, our footsteps muffled by the soft sand and the steady pulse of the ocean. I couldn't shake the feeling that something in the air had changed, that the ordinary rules of nature had been momentarily suspended. Every time I looked upward, I half expected to see the flicker of those enormous wings or catch a glimpse of that shifting, ancient face. But the sky remained clear, a vast canvas dotted only with familiar stars. Later, when we finally returned to our car, I couldn't help but dive into online research, scouring every forum and cryptid website for reports of similar sightings. To my astonishment, I discovered a small but dedicated community documenting pterosaur sightings along the California coast. Dozens of accounts, many from people who described seeing similar huge, slow-moving winged figures, filled the pages. It wasn't a phenomenon widely reported in the mainstream, but to those who had witnessed it, the experience was as undeniable as the pull of the tide. I tried to remain a rational skeptic, convincing myself that perhaps it was a misidentification, maybe an unusually large bird affected by optical illusions under the moonlight, or even a strange weather balloon or aircraft seen from an odd angle. But nothing fit. The sheer size, the slow, deliberate flapping of what appeared to be leathery wings, and the way the creature moved like it was navigating not just space but time itself, defied every conventional explanation. My girlfriend and I talked about that night for weeks afterward. In whispered tones over late-night coffee and long drives back home, we replayed every moment with the intensity of a shared secret. It was like the universe paused for a second, she'd say, eyes distant and thoughtful. Like it wanted us to see something that we're not meant to see every day. I nodded, unable to articulate the blend of awe and terror that I felt, a mixture of wonder at the raw, primal beauty of an ancient creature and a deep, unyielding fear of the unknown. Even now, years later, I find myself checking the skies on clear nights, scanning for a hint of that triangle-like silhouette against the sprawling cosmos. I wonder if I will ever experience that moment again, if the fabric of reality might once more reveal a secret that shatters the bounds of our ordinary lives. I keep my phone ready, though it feels futile to capture something so ephemeral and profound, and every time I catch a glimpse of a strange shadow or a fleeting flash of light, my heart skips a beat, and I'm reminded that no matter how modern and urban our world becomes, the mysteries of the universe are always hovering just above us, waiting silently to be discovered. Hey everyone, if you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. Redditor 6. I lived in an old house that had been occupied by students for as long as I could remember. A creaking two-story building with a basement that was padlocked from the outside. It was a place where legends and whispered stories mingled with the musty smell of old wood and faded wallpaper. One of the most persistent tales was about a ghost named Violetta. I never really put much stock in ghost stories, dismissing them as nothing more than the product of overactive imaginations. Yet, that night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m., and I was alone in my room on the third floor, a cramped space illuminated only by the dim glow of a bedside lamp. I had always had a tendency to sleepwalk and talk in my sleep, so I wasn't surprised when I'd wake up with bits of incoherent ramblings. But that night was different. As I lay under my thin blanket, I suddenly became aware of a sound, a scratchy, almost raspy whisper drifting through the darkness. It was soft at first, barely audible above the steady hum of the house settling, but as I listened, the words became clearer. Hello, spoken in a tone that was both welcoming and haunting. I sat up, my heart pounding fiercely, and turned toward the large window that overlooked the front yard. Outside, the darkness was complete, the only light coming from a scattering of distant street lamps and the muted glow of the moon. And there, barely discernible against the void, was the faint outline of a woman. The figure was featureless, her form shrouded in a haze of pale luminescence that made her seem almost unreal. Yet her presence was undeniable. I could feel it seeping into the room, an otherworldly chill that prickled my skin. I tried to move, to call out, but I found myself unable to speak, a numbness gripping my throat as though my voice had been stolen away. Panic surged through me, a primal fear that rooted me to the spot. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there, eyes fixed on the window, trying desperately to rationalize the impossible sight. I knew that I had a long history of sleepwalking and strange dreams, but this was different. This was raw, undeniable, and 100% real. Meanwhile, in the kitchen downstairs, one of my housemates was pulling an all-nighter, cooking up a late meal. At around 1:45 a.m., she told me later that she heard heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing from the direction of the basement. The basement had always been a place of mystery, a space locked tight from the outside, with me being the only one holding the key. She described the sound as if someone were pacing back and forth, a slow, measured shuffle that resonated through the quiet corridors of our old house. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the incident, and though we tried to dismiss it as nothing more than a figment of our collective sleep deprivation, it stuck with me. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the thin curtains, I woke up still in my room. My throat was raw from the silent scream I couldn't utter, and I found myself coughing intermittently, a reaction so intense that the roommate in the adjacent room later asked if I was sick. I tried to explain that I hadn't been ill. I had just been awake, frozen, in terror, unable to move or speak, while something unfathomable happened outside my window. That day, I replayed the night's events over and over in my head, struggling to make sense of it all. I wondered if it had been a dream, a particularly vivid episode of sleep paralysis, or an overactive imagination fueled by insomnia. But deep down, I knew what I'd experienced was far more real than any nightmare. The sensation of being watched, the paralyzing fear that gripped me as that ghostly figure whispered hello into the darkness, all of it left a mark on my psyche that I couldn't shake. A month later, the phenomenon returned, though in a different way. It was around 2:30 a.m. when, once again, I heard those heavy footsteps coming from downstairs. This time they were unmistakable, a deliberate, rhythmic pacing that seemed to echo through the very bones of the house. The sound, combined with the memory of that first encounter, forced me into a state of hyper-awareness every time I tried to sleep. I began to dread the dead hours of night, staying awake for long stretches just to avoid the paralyzing fear of those inexplicable sounds. In the following weeks, more family members started to notice the strange disturbances. My parents, long skeptical of ghost stories, began to exchange worried glances whenever the clock neared the early morning hours. They didn't hear much, perhaps a faint murmur here, a soft tapping there, but the sense that something was amiss grew with each passing night. We never found any tangible evidence of an intruder, no footprints, no signs of forced entry, yet occasionally there would be an inexplicable patch of leaves or a small pile of dirt in the living room, as if someone, or something, had passed through without leaving a trace. I tried setting up a camera in my room, hoping to catch a glimpse of that spectral visitor, but nothing ever appeared on tape. The only validation came from the whispered testimonies of my housemates and the lingering, unshakable fear that settled over us every night. My grandparents later joked that maybe the ghost was a dead soldier looking for his whiskey. But even that light-hearted explanation couldn't dispel the dread that had taken root in my heart. Now, years have passed, and I no longer live in that old house. Yet the memory of that night, of Violetta, as we eventually came to call her, remains vivid. I sometimes find myself lying awake in the dark, unable to shake the feeling that something is watching, that the boundary between our world and the next is thinner than it seems. I still wonder if those footsteps, those whispered greetings, were just the product of sleep deprivation, or if they were a genuine intrusion from a realm beyond our understanding. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened on that fateful night. Perhaps Violetta was a benign presence, a lost soul, lingering in the corridors of an old house, seeking acknowledgement in the silence of the night. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a glimpse into a hidden world that intersects with our own in fleeting, terrifying moments. All I know is that the experience changed me. It made me question the nature of reality, the thin line between dreams and wakefulness, and the secrets that hide in the shadows of the night. Even now, whenever I pass a window in a quiet house or hear the soft creak of old wood at night, I feel that same chill run down my spine. The ghost of Violetta, whether real or a product of an overactive imagination, remains with me, a silent reminder that sometimes the most unexplainable parts of our past continue to haunt us, long after the darkness has lifted. Redditor 7. There are two memories from my childhood that still haunt me, one that arrived on the day after my grandfather died, and another that crept into our old house as if it were a part of the walls themselves. I was about 10 years old when my grandpa passed away from cancer, just a day after Christmas Eve. The house felt hollow after his loss, and in a small ritual that made little sense even then, my grandma and I turned off his battered old Nokia, a relic without a touchscreen, its simple, sturdy design as unyielding as the man himself, and placed it on a shelf. We left it there, a silent monument to his absence, and for a week nothing disturbed its stillness. Then, one ordinary afternoon, as I sat idly in the living room, the familiar static buzz of a phone suddenly shattered the quiet. An SMS tone rang out, piercing the silence. I knew in my heart that the phone was off, a fact as certain as the absence of my grandfather. My hands trembled as my grandma, with a mix of reluctance and curiosity, handed the phone to me. I opened the message, my eyes widening in disbelief as I read the single line. I arrived. Creepy as hell. It was as if Grandpa himself had sent a farewell from beyond, a ghostly transmission that defied explanation. The words etched themselves into my young mind, filling it with a blend of sorrow and eerie wonder. A secret message from a man who was no longer there, yet somehow still reaching out. Years later, I encountered something else, something that has never quite faded from my memory. When I was younger, maybe around 8, the house I lived in was vast and divided into separate apartments belonging to my aunt. In that sprawling old building, I shared a space with my aunt, my grandma, her medium friend, and a coworker friend of my aunt who sometimes brought along her young son. Nights in that place were filled with strange murmurs and unexplained occurrences that I couldn't begin to understand. Every night, without fail, the little boy would wake up crying at precisely the same time. One evening, the medium and enigmatic woman who always spoke in soft, measured tones sat down with him. I remember watching from the corner, my heart pounding as the boy described in trembling whispers that every time he awoke, there was a black man with a weird, distorted face lurking in the room. The sight of this shadowy figure, a presence that was both inexplicably human and disturbingly other, sent shivers racing down my spine. That night, as the medium began her ritual to cleanse the area, her demeanor shifted. At first, her words were calm and soothing, like a lullaby meant to ease a troubled child. But as she continued, her tone grew sharp and aggressive, a command to banish something ancient and malignant. I stood there, a silent observer in the doorway, feeling the electric charge in the air, knowing instinctively that something was very wrong. Unable to bear the intensity, I stepped outside, my small feet padding silently on the cool floor. The medium later confided in hushed tones that it had been a demon hiding in that room, a malevolent presence that, once cleansed, would no longer haunt us. And while I never saw the figure again, the memory of that night, its oppressive energy, the raw terror in the boy's eyes, and the determined, almost desperate incantations of the medium remains with me, a dark puzzle whose pieces I still cannot quite fit together. Sometimes I wonder if the two experiences are linked by something unspoken, a thread woven into the fabric of my early life, the ghostly SMS from my grandpa, his digital farewell echoing in the silence of our home, and the demon that stalked the corridors of my aunt's sprawling house. Both spoke of an unseen realm intersecting with our own. I've tried to dismiss them as the overactive imaginings of a frightened child, yet their vivid clarity refuses to be forgotten. In moments of quiet reflection, I find myself questioning whether these events were real or simply dreams conjured by loss and fear. I carry them with me, these memories of otherworldly messages and shadowed figures, as both a burden and a curious comfort. a reminder that sometimes the universe reaches out in whispers and fragments, urging us to believe in mysteries beyond the cold, hard facts of everyday life. Even now, when I see a faint glimmer of light on a quiet evening or catch a glimpse of a shadow that doesn't belong, I feel a familiar chill, as if that long-ago ghost is still watching, still trying to communicate a secret that I have yet to fully understand. Perhaps one day, I'll piece together the meanings behind those inexplicable moments, or maybe they'll remain elusive, tucked away like faded photographs of a past too strange to revisit. All I know is that the memory of my grandpa's final message and the demon that haunted that old apartment are etched into my soul, a silent testament to the fragile border between what we see and what lies just beyond, waiting patiently in the darkness. Redditor 8. I was 21. Something happened that still leaves me questioning what is real. I was asleep in my small apartment, the kind of quiet that comes with deep, undisturbed sleep in a city where every noise fades into a background hum. I'd just drifted off, lost in the soft darkness, when a sudden loud pop, like a firecracker but not quite as loud, jarred me awake. My first thought was that it might have been my old computer malfunctioning, an electrical short perhaps. Groggy and still half in the land of dreams, I sat up and glanced over at my computer, expecting to see smoke or a flickering screen. There was nothing unusual, and the room was as dark and still as it had been before. I settled back onto my bed, trying to shake off the moment, and shifted to lie on my back again. I stared up at the ceiling, my eyes adjusting to the faint light, when, almost imperceptibly, I began to notice a vague, shadowy figure hovering just beyond the edge of my vision. It was as if someone were standing next to my bed, gently waving a hand over me. I'd seen shapes like this before in my dreams, or in fleeting moments when I wasn't quite awake, so curiosity mingled with unease. I couldn't explain it, but I felt an inexplicable pull to watch, to see what this familiar yet out-of-place presence might do next. Then, as quickly as the hand had appeared, it vanished. I felt a subtle pressure on the side of my bed, as if something unseen were pushing down on it, a slow, deliberate dip that was noticeable yet not aggressive. I tried to sit up, but my body remained strangely unresponsive, as if held in a suspended state between sleep and wakefulness. My heart pounded in my chest, but I wasn't afraid in the way one might expect. It was more of an overwhelming astonishment, a mix of wonder and disbelief. When I finally forced my eyes to refocus, I looked toward the spot where the shadow had been, and then, out from the dark, a figure materialized. A reptilian-looking humanoid that seemed to be outlined in the kind of soft, diffuse light you see when you press on your closed eyes. He was wearing a plain, slightly loose shirt that draped over a body too subtle to fully grasp in that half-awake state. In his left hand he held what looked like a clipboard, and in his right, a pen, as though he were meticulously taking notes on everything around him. His head was turned to his left, so I saw only the right side of his face, which was the most striking part. His eye, one large, round, almost cartoonish eye, stared at me with an expression that was both concerned and kind. I could see scales outlined on his skin, shimmering faintly with a greenish-yellow, almost rainbow hue, like the iridescent glare of pressed fingers on closed eyelids. Larger scales edged his prominent brow, giving his appearance an otherworldly texture that contrasted sharply with his otherwise humanoid form. His nose was small and beak-like, and it seemed that his upper lip merged seamlessly with his jaw, leaving no discernible mouth, just smooth, unbroken skin. His shoulders were unusually broad, more so than most human beings, yet he appeared a bit shorter than what you typically expect. I couldn't see anything below his elbows, so his legs and feet were shrouded in mystery. For a brief, breathtaking second, every detail was etched into my mind. The intricate play of light outlining his form, the way his features glowed softly against the darkness, and the surreal calm in his expression. It was as though he had stepped out of an ancient legend, a being from a world where the rules of nature were rewritten in luminous hues. And yet, he was here, in the very center of my vision, in my own room, as real as the faint hum of my refrigerator. I tried to move, to reach out, or even blink more than a few times, but my body was locked in place by something I couldn't describe, an invisible force that made me feel as though I were caught in a state between sleeping and waking. In that moment, time itself seemed to slow, every heartbeat echoing in my ears as I absorbed every impossible detail. The creature didn't speak, No sound emerged from him, only a quiet, almost empathetic gaze that communicated 1,000 unspoken words. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, the being began to shimmer, his form dissolving into countless tiny motes of light. I watched, transfixed, as he faded, leaving behind nothing but the lingering glow of that ethereal greenish-yellow light on the ceiling. The silence returned, heavy and impenetrable, and with it came a profound sense of emptiness, as if a fragment of the universe had been plucked from existence right before my eyes. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the encounter pressing on me, until I finally managed to blink away the last traces of his presence. When I eventually forced myself to sit up, my mind was racing with questions I could scarcely articulate. Who was that creature? What did he want from me? And why did I feel so inexplicably drawn to him, as if he were a messenger from a realm I was never meant to see? I tried to draw him later, sitting at my desk with a pencil and paper, trying to capture the strange luminescent details of his form. But the image remained elusive, a shifting, spectral memory that defied precise replication. I still wonder about him, a haunting, inexplicable encounter that has persisted in my mind, a reminder that the line between our reality and something far greater, far more mysterious, is perilously thin. In the days after that night, I questioned everything I knew about my own perceptions. Was it a hallucination born of fatigue, a vivid dream that had slipped into my waking moments? Or had I truly seen something that defied all logical explanation, a glimpse into a world beyond our own? I spoke about it in hushed tones to a few friends, but their skeptical looks and polite smiles only deepened the secret in my heart. I began to spend long nights staring at the ceiling, half expecting to catch a glimpse of that same reptilian figure, half in dread and half in awe. Now, years later, I still find myself drawn to the night's quiet, the moments when the world is dark and the boundaries of reality seem to blur. Sometimes, when I lie awake in a silent room, I catch a fleeting shadow, a flicker of that same greenish light, and for a split second, I'm reminded of that one surreal moment when a being from beyond had graced my vision. I don't know what to make of it, whether it was a product of an overactive imagination or a genuine encounter with something from another realm, but it has left an indelible mark on me. Redditor 9. I've carried a secret with me since I was a child, a secret that has danced on the edge of my dreams and reality, always connected to the elusive presence of Sasquatch. From as far back as I can remember, I've had these vivid, almost magical dreams in which I was not alone. In those dreams, Sasquatch weren't terrifying beasts, but gentle, otherworldly friends, and we communicated in silence, telepathically, as if our minds were linked by a hidden frequency of the universe. I remember one dream from my teenage years on the reservation in Oregon, when I was about 16. I was wandering along the rugged trails near my grandparents' land, the dense forest alive with whispers of wind and rustling leaves. Out of nowhere, I saw him, a young Sasquatch, maybe only 5 feet tall, with an entirely unexpected hue, an almost glowing orange like the embers of a dying campfire. His eyes, soft and knowing, met mine with a kind of silent greeting. For a few heartbeats, everything else melted away, the fear, the chill of the forest, even the distant call of an owl, and there was only that moment of pure, unspoken understanding. Then, as if receiving a silent command, he turned and sprinted up the steep mountainside, disappearing into the shadows of towering pines. I stood there, transfixed, the image burning itself into my memory like a secret I was meant to cherish. Years later, life took me far from that place, to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I was living in a world of arid deserts and endless highways. It was during that period, after a devastating loss that shattered my world, my oldest brother had gone missing and was later found, tragically fallen off the Oregon coast while hiking, that my dreams turned dark. For nights on end, I was tormented by visions I could neither escape nor fully understand. On the 4th night of relentless nightmares, I dreamt of my mom's house back in Oregon, but this time, the familiar, comforting structure was encircled by 7 colossal Sasquatch, each towering at least 11 or 12 feet tall. They stood in a perfect circle, holding hands in a gesture that was both eerie and ritualistic. Their forms, so vastly larger than the gentle friend of my youth, exuded a powerful presence, majestic, somber, and inexplicably protective. In that dream, the creature's eyes shone with an ancient light as they murmured in a language I felt rather than heard, a language of sorrow, hope, and warning. I sensed that they were trying to tell me something about loss and the fragile thread that binds us all. I awoke the next morning drenched in sweat, my heart heavy with a premonition that I couldn't shake. When I called home that day, my family was in shock, not only at the news of my brother's disappearance, but at my unspoken knowledge of the unspeakable tragedy that had already unfolded along the rugged Oregon coast. They couldn't fathom how I, a mere teenager, could have known something was terribly wrong. And though my family never openly discussed these experiences, the silent glances and the shared tremor in our voices said it all. Over the years, my dreams of Sasquatch have woven themselves into the very fabric of my being. They are as constant as the stars in the night sky, sometimes gentle and playful, other times dark and foreboding. In those quiet moments when sleep eludes me, I often find myself drifting into that dream world where we speak without words. I see my friends among the trees, giants with deep, soulful eyes, and we share secrets of the universe. They tell me of ancient guardianship, of a time when the earth was wild and raw, and every living creature knew its place in the great, unfolding tapestry of existence. I've tried to explain these dreams to those around me, but words always fall short. Most dismiss them as the fancy of a sensitive mind or the residue of a turbulent past. But to me, each dream is a vivid reminder that there is more to this world than our eyes can see, a hidden reality that exists just beyond the veil of our everyday lives. The dreams have become a kind of map, guiding me through moments of profound loss and the inevitable pain of growing up. They are the one place where I feel a connection, a deep, unspoken bond with these mysterious beings who, despite their immense size and strange appearance, have always felt like friends. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the night is particularly still, I sense their presence in the rustling of the wind or the soft, distant calls echoing from the forest. I find solace in the thought that, somewhere out there, these guardians watch over me, their ancient eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond my years. And in those moments of quiet reflection, I feel both protected and painfully aware of the impermanence of life. The loss of my brother, the shock that still ripples through my family, and the haunting memory of that circle of giant Sasquatch. Each one is a thread in the tapestry of my past, a reminder of the inexplicable ways the universe touches our lives. I sometimes wonder if these dreams are a form of memory, a recollection of a time long forgotten when these beings walked openly among us, before we built our cities and forgot the wild, untamed magic of the earth. Perhaps my mind is reaching out, trying to reclaim a lost connection, a bond that was severed by the relentless march of time. Or maybe, just maybe, these encounters are not dreams at all, but real glimpses into a hidden world that exists in parallel with our own, a world where the rules of nature bend and ancient beings still roam the wild places of the earth. I've spent countless nights piecing together these fragments, searching for an explanation that might make sense of it all. I've scoured old texts, talked to elders on the reservation, and even delved into modern research on cryptozoology and parapsychology. Yet no single theory has managed to encompass the breadth and depth of my experiences. All I know is that the dreams have always been there, a constant, if sometimes cryptic, presence that has shaped my understanding of life and loss. Now, as an adult, I carry these memories with a mix of wonder and quiet sorrow. They remind me of the delicate balance between the known and the unknown, and of the profound mysteries that still lie just beyond our grasp. When I close my eyes at night, I sometimes see the orange glow of that youthful Sasquatch and hear the silent, solemn chorus of giants encircling my mother's house, a bittersweet echo of a time when the earth was alive with magic and the boundaries between dreams and reality were as fluid as water. I don't claim to have all the answers. Perhaps my dreams are simply the product of a sensitive, troubled mind trying to make sense of loss and change. But I swear, deep down, that the connection is real. Whether as ancient guardians, protectors of forgotten lore, or remnants of a wild past that still lingers in the shadows of our modern world, the Sasquatch have left their mark on me. And in that truth, however elusive, I find both comfort and a profound, unending mystery. Hey everyone! If you found this channel gripping and want more real stories, Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop.